seriously, it's like everywhere you turn, right? AI this, AI that. 5 minutes on your phone and bam, another headline about how AI is going to revolutionize everything.
Yeah.
Or maybe destroy it all. I mean, it feels like we're constantly being pulled between these two totally opposite extremes. Either AI is the key to utopia, solving every problem we've got, or it's going to take over and leave us in this bleak, algorithm-driven dystopia. I don't know about you, but it's definitely something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's like we're at this really crucial point, this fork in the road, and the potential of AI, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. The possibilities seem almost endless, but at the same time, there's this undeniable undercurrent of anxiety, right? And when you really dig into it, I think a lot of that anxiety boils down to this one fundamental question.
Yeah.
How's this whole AI thing actually going to change the way we work? Like, what does it mean for our jobs, our careers, our entire professional lives? Are we really on the brink of this era of leisure everyone's been predicting for decades? Or are we headed towards a future where work just becomes even more intense and demanding? Especially when you consider all the inequalities that already exist, you know? It's a big question mark, and that's what we're here to explore today, right? To really dive into these different perspectives and try to make some sense of it all.
Exactly, yeah. And what's so interesting is that we've got this whole spectrum of opinions to work with here. You got people painting these utopian pictures of what the future could look like, and then you've got others issuing some pretty dire warnings about the potential pitfalls. It actually reminds me of something I read a while back about this prediction that John Maynard Keynes made way back in 1928.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was saying that by 2028, which, wow, that's basically now technology would have advanced so much that everyone would only be working like 15 hours a week. 15 hours. Imagine all the free time you'd have.
It's kind of wild to think about, right? Especially when you look at how things are for most of us. This whole hustle culture, always striving for more productivity. It's like being busy is a badge of honor or something.
It's crazy.
It's so different from what Keynes was talking about, you know? Like a society where people can actually enjoy the benefits of all this technological progress, where leisure time is valued and people have the space to do things they actually care about. It really makes you wonder what he'd think if he could see us now.
I know, right? And what's really fascinating is that you see that same kind of split in opinions when people talk about AI today. On the one hand, you've got these super optimistic takes, like you've got Prime Minister Modi in India talking about AI as this massive opportunity, this driver for job creation and innovation. And even Bill Gates has suggested that thanks to AI, we might all end up working just 3 days a week.
Right.
I mean, that sounds pretty amazing on the surface, doesn't it? Like we're finally on the verge of achieving that technological utopia.
It definitely taps into this deeply ingrained hope that technology will ultimately free us from the drudgery of work, right? You know, all the tedious or demanding tasks that we'd rather not be doing.
Rolling.
But then, like you said, there's this whole other side to the conversation, this more cautious, even a bit unsettling perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where you start to see some real cause for concern. Because then you have organizations like India's Niti Aayog predicting that, due to AI, a huge chunk of their workforce, like maybe as much as 23%, could lose their jobs by 2040. When you zoom out and look at the global picture, the World Bank has estimated that the potential job losses from AI could be even more dramatic, like as high as 69%. Yikes. Suddenly that 3-day work week doesn't sound quite so appealing, does it?
Yeah, it's less of a perk and more like a necessity.
Exactly. Like what happens if all these people find themselves out of work? It really throws the whole idea of a leisurely future into question, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It creates this huge sense of uncertainty. Like, what's the real future of work going to look like? And, you know, what's interesting is that this isn't the first time we've grappled with this kind of anxiety about technology and its potential to disrupt jobs. Think about the Industrial Revolution, for instance. When machines started taking over all these tasks that humans had always done, I mean, there were definitely some major challenges and upheavals back then. But ultimately, economies did adapt, right? New industries emerged, new jobs were created, and for the most part, living standards eventually improved.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, will we see a similar pattern with AI, even though the scale might be much, much larger this time around?
Right. Like, yeah, we figured out how to work alongside those new machines. Whole new sectors popped up that nobody could have predicted. But it does feel different this time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because AI isn't just automating those repetitive manual tasks. It's starting to do things that we always thought were, like, uniquely human. Creative work, complex decision-making, stuff that requires real brain power.
That's a key difference, for sure. We're not just talking about AI taking over the doing anymore. We're talking about it potentially taking over the thinking, too.
Uh,
And it's not that far-fetched to imagine a future where algorithms are analyzing data, creating reports, and even coming up with business strategies that used to be the domain of highly skilled professionals. I mean, just think about it. AI could potentially make some of those jobs obsolete, and that could have a pretty significant impact on a whole range of professions.
Yeah, like what happens to those people?
Yeah.
And what kind of skills will be valuable in a world where AI can do so much of the thinking for us?
Exactly. Those are big questions. And even if AI does lead to this huge surge in productivity and economic growth, it raises another really important question. Who actually benefits from all this progress?
Mm.
Like, we're already seeing projections that the AI industry in India alone could contribute something like $1.5 trillion to their GDP by 2030. And the government is definitely investing heavily in AI development. But how does all that translate into real improvements for everyday people?
Right.
Will it create more opportunities, better jobs, a higher standard of living for everyone? Or will it just concentrate even more wealth and power in the hands of a select few?
Yeah, those are the kind of questions we need to be asking, right? Because if we look back at history, technological advancements haven't always led to widespread prosperity.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, as some economists have pointed out, there's a real risk that all this progress could just end up fueling even more consumption.
Right, right.
Like this constant cycle of wanting and acquiring more stuff without actually improving people's well-being or increasing their free time. It makes you wonder if our whole system is even equipped to handle such a fundamental shift in the way work is organized and valued.
I know, right? It's like this twisted version of Keynes' vision. Instead of everyone enjoying more leisure, we all end up working even harder just to keep up with this ever-growing demand for more, more, more.
It's kind of bleak when you think about it that way.
Yeah, a bit. But when we really step back and look at AI's potential impact, it's this double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, there's a compelling argument that it could actually level the playing field in some ways. Like, imagine if less experienced workers could learn from AI models trained on the expertise of top performers. It could accelerate their learning and development, potentially giving them access to opportunities they might not have had otherwise.
Yeah, that's a pretty optimistic view, but I can see how it could play out that way.
Yeah, but then you've got organizations like the IMF and the ILO, the International Monetary Fund and the International Labor Organization, and they're painting a much more concerning picture, especially when you look at what could happen in emerging markets.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, their warnings are pretty stark, aren't they?
They are. The IMF, for example, has estimated that almost 40% of jobs in emerging economies are highly vulnerable to AI, and almost half of those jobs could be completely replaced. That's a potential crisis for those countries. And then you have the ILO raising concerns about the potential impact on wages. Like, if AI can do the work more efficiently and for less money, what incentive do companies have to pay humans the same amount? It makes you wonder if we could actually see a decrease in the overall share of income that goes to labor.
Right. And it all comes back to this fundamental debate about the future of the work week, doesn't it? You hear these wildly different ideas being thrown around.
Hmm.
Like you have Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, talking about a future where we all work 3.5 days a week,
Right.
which, let's be honest, sounds pretty fantastic. But then you have someone like S.N. Subramanian from the engineering firm L&T over in India saying that we might end up working 90 hours a week. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just insane, right?
It is a massive discrepancy, isn't it? And it just highlights the huge range of possibilities we're facing. Like, at one end of the spectrum, you have this vision where AI liberates us from work and we all have this abundance of free time to pursue our passions, just like Keynes imagined. But then at the other end, you have this scenario where people are working longer and harder than ever before, just trying to keep up in this hyper-competitive, AI-driven economy. And then, of course, there's the question of what happens to those who get left behind entirely.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we keep all of this in context, especially when we're talking about a country like India or really any developing country where you still have huge challenges like poverty and food insecurity. I mean, you've got hundreds of millions of people who depend on government assistance just to get by. These are urgent issues that we can't ignore while we're busy debating the future of work and the potential impact of AI.
Absolutely. We can't have this conversation in a vacuum, pretending like those problems don't exist. We need to think critically about how AI will interact with the current realities, both good and bad. Will it help us find new ways to solve those deeply ingrained social and economic challenges? Or is there a risk that it could make things even worse?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And it all brings us back to where we started. Will the rise of AI finally usher in this era of leisure that thinkers like Keynes have been predicting for almost a century? Or will it just end up making things more unequal, creating an even bigger gap between those who have access to leisure and economic security and those who don't? It seems like we're at a real crossroads, and the choices we make today are going to have a huge impact on what the future looks like. It's definitely something to keep in mind as we move forward.
It really is.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
A lot to think about.